Good afternoon and welcome to the final session of Disruptors Midlands today, sponsored by Ribble Cycles and Welink Communications. I'm Ben Ormsby, the Yorkshire editor of thebusinessdesk.com, and over the next 45 minutes, we're going to talk about how technology is impacting urban mobility and the role it will play in our net zero journey. So, tech is often seen as an accelerator for our business journeys, and sometimes that is literally true. It can be the engine that drives change in urban mobility, disrupting how and when we move about, how we pay for it, and ultimately the direction of travel for where we work and live. I'm pleased to have an expert panel with me today who will be getting on the proverbial bus with me now to talk about how it has changed and what is to come. And if you have any questions for the panel, please put them into the chat section on your screen, on the side of your screen, and I'll put them to the panel as we go. But firstly, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves and start by answering the question, how much is tech changing how we get around our towns and cities? I'm going to start with Tom, please.
Hi there, my name's Tom Quay. I am the founder and CEO at Passenger. Our software enables public transport operators, primarily bus operators, to retail digitally to their customers and provide journey planning information. We work with operators up and down the country, so we're a sort of UK-based company working with around 85 different operators in various guises. So majority of those are mobile apps and website deployments. And yeah, how is tech changing how we get around? It's huge. I mean, tech is changing everything, to be quite honest with you, and I think certainly it's enabling us to make decisions in the moment about how we move around. It's enabling us to sort of break the established patterns of behaviour that we have already with our car usage. It's really allowing us to see alternatives to our day-to-day, to the sort of long established behaviours that we have ingrained in our daily lives. So it's giving us a window into what those alternatives might be. And how we might access them as generally very busy individuals.
I guess the same question then, to you, Stephen.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Stephen Muldowney. I'm from Welink Communications. Welink Communications is a wireless broadband provider offering gigabit speeds. We're UK-based, similar to all the organisations today on the panel. We've recently launched our service in the end of summer in Edinburgh, offering packages of 300 meg to 2.5 gig, soon to offer 2.5 gigabits connections in Edinburgh. Our sort of, look around sort of, how tech is changing is around mobility around towns and cities is more around the reduction in this mobility in the sense of people that are traveling less because of through lockdown, using the connectivity, and using services, electronically, and thus reducing the need for some of that mobility around towns and centres.
Fantastic. Fraser, same one to you, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Fraser Hamilton. I'm from Ribble Cycles. So we're a direct-to-consumer bike brand. We've been around since 1897. So we've seen quite a dramatic change in the landscape of urban mobility, certainly over that period. I guess from our side, we're seeing a huge amount of electrification that's really regenerating people to think and make choices about what type of transport they take. And certainly from our perspective, electric bikes over the last 2 years has seen 200% growth in our business, and certainly the rising area of where we see urban mobility changing and technology supporting all those kind of decisions that people are making. But even just beyond bikes, we're seeing kind of things like smart sensors making more accurate decisions for city planners, for people trying to get out and about. You even have to look back, how far we've come from 10 years ago, where the first mobile application to hail a taxi was kind of founded. And you think now that's pretty common in terms of what people like. And, from a disruptive point of view, that really shook up the kind of mini cab and black cab market to think, well, actually, hold on, the consumer is at the forefront of what we should be doing here. So I see technology really being a vehicle enabler for more consumer choice around what they want to do, how they want to travel, when they want to travel. And there's loads of subsects that sit under there. But I mean, one of the key things I've seen over the last few years, which is really quite a mundane topic, but it's actually quite a big enabler, is around mobile payments and how payments for for taking, transportation services has revolutionized people hopping on and hopping off. And you look at places, people like Amazon who are presenting shopping stores with kind of, no till to go through, and you can walk out with products. That's quite exciting when you start to look at how urban mobility works around the city later on, how people want to pick up something, take it, use it, and then leave it there and still be charged it the same way. So it's quite a lot of technology going on in very many different sectors. And I think collaboration that we'll see across the board will start to enable our cities to look very different from what we've seen over the last 10 years.
And I think the fascinating thing that you've also touched on is that acceleration of mobile technology, perhaps, and utilizing that. Do you think the pandemic has accelerated the change in that? We've gone out from the last 18 months from perhaps people being reticent to use contactless to it being commonplace now. Do you see that as a big change, and with the technology front as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We look at, I'd sort of looked at this in terms of what are those key behaviors that changed, and some of them are quite significant, some are less significant. So you go from the scale, but let's look at telework, working at home, so that behavior of, we've had to, just from a mobility perspective, people be got used to having to work from home. So that, needing the bandwidth to be able to do that. But it's beyond that. If you look at then saying we just weren't able to go to the doctors, that, there's something like, I think, 200 million GP visits each year, that take place. So during COVID, 70% of consultations were done remotely. I think we'll move to that where people feel more comfortable with that. So that's not having to go around, and your GP doesn't have to be local to you because they're doing consultants. So we don't need to have that. Potentially, there might be a change in the way that we are happy that we have a GP that may be, not even based in the UK that we mainly deal with. So I think things like that. And then you go to sort of, that the obvious was that online shopping. People generally be more comfortable with that. But that has an impact then on suddenly in terms of what we're doing around the mobility in terms of delivery. This last mile delivery, which is a huge increase in that, and then the impact around that in terms of both emissions and traffic, etc. But then there are subtle changes. Film premieres. That people now become where we used to go. We'd only go and watch a film premiere in the cinema. That was the sort of and we go and have a meal, or that's a now change of behaviour which is much more acceptable now to stay in, order some food, and just download a premiere because we're more confident in the technology to be able to do that. But also our behaviours change in terms of what we expect.
So, and I guess, Tom, that leads me to an interesting point, because public transport that you work with, it isn't always the fastest adopter of technology. I think it would be fair to say there might be some caveats to that in certain parts of the country, but I am up in Yorkshire, so I can probably get away with that as a fairly true statement. But how much have you seen those operators having to accelerate stuff they were probably planning already, but had to bring in quickly as a result of the pandemic?
No, it's a really good point. I think pre-pandemic, bus operators in particular in the transport mix were probably slow to adopt new technology. I think consumer technology has really made it very, very commonplace to be able to locate either an Uber or a Deliveroo driver, and that has become part of our daily life. So I think in terms of adopting that, the industry's definitely been traditional public transport has been slower to adopt that, but I think it's really gathered pace in the last couple of years, and I think the pandemic certainly has accelerated that shift to contactless payment on the vehicles, mobile digital ticketing, and away from cash. And I think that has a huge impact potentially on the quality of that experience for a customer. If there are less and less people using cash on a vehicle, then that vehicle is moving much, much more quickly along its route, and that means that people are getting where they need to go a lot faster. Being able to interact with the bus operators in a way that they expect, in terms of being able to open up an app and get all of the information they need with regard to disruptions, any changes on the network, any price changes, all of the different bits and pieces that they need. It's all there for them in a way that perhaps it hadn't been before. So it's certainly moved quickly into to meet expectations from in terms of what consumers are wanting these days. I think going forward, I think that momentum will keep pace, and I really think it'd be quite an interesting area of growth in the way that we see different integrations between different modes. So a lot of areas now have micro mobility schemes, scooters and bikes that are easy to rent via mobile apps, and there will be plenty of integrations of those services with what I can consider the core bus network for first and last mile. So that combination of being able to get to a bus stop on a scooter perhaps, or on a bike, and then perhaps moving slightly more quickly through an urban area on a bus, and then completing that journey at the other end on another micro mobility option. I think that combination of technology will really start to make it easy for people to consider alternatives to perhaps what they would have already done in terms of using a car because it's parked on the driveway. I think an interesting point, just to pick up on Stephen's comment about the traveling less, I think our own car ownership is going to start to be questioned a lot more when we are using that vehicle less. It's going to be more expensive per journey, per usage of that vehicle, for something that's already 98% of the time sitting there underutilized. If we're actually traveling less anyway through by remote activity, then we're going to start to question that more, and we're going to look for technology to sort of provide us with the answers in terms of the alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, just a personal perspective of that, I during lockdown, I got rid of my car. I was a 25,000 mile a year driver. That's what I did every year. Have done that for, maybe not proudly here, but 15 years of doing that. And lockdown, I don't own even a car now. So there's I made a sample of ones. It's probably not, but that I'm a classic example of that.
And that actually ties in nicely, because I was going to say, lockdown brought everyone an opportunity, perhaps because we had restrictions, to get out a little bit more, whether it was encouraging walking or cycling and things. So active travel felt like it came into the public consciousness perhaps more. Do you think that trajectory is going to continue? And how do you see technology being used to encourage that? Tom, you've touched on it there, perhaps using it for the first and last bit of the journey, and then mass transit in another way. Fraser, I guess, how do you see that active travel being able to be championed?
Yeah, so obviously we see that very regularly. I think through the lockdown, it was kind of outside of toilet roll, bikes were probably up there as a kind of in thing to be buying, and the industry is still feeling the effects of that sort of growth and demand, which is fantastic from that point of view. Certainly for us, from what we've kind of looked at and addressed from a product point of view, and certainly what Ribble have gone to market with, we've really focused on taking e-bikes to a lightweight platform. So most of the e-bikes that were currently out in the marketplace maybe 2 years ago were very bulky, very heavy. What we found over this process of launching e-bikes, bringing them to market, is the lighter we've been able to bring e-bikes, the more people have started to get engaged and active with it. And I'm not just talking from people like the older generation, where e-bikes were originally pitched at to say, right, you can get yourself fit and active again, which is by and large has been the demographic that's chased that. But we're seeing a more youthful market coming into this that's looking at e-bikes as a way to go further for longer. So therefore, they're using an electric bike, to say, well, actually, do you know what, on my commute this week, I can ride 5 days a week on a battery powered bike, essentially, and then on a normal bike, they feel as though they'll be doing it, maybe in half more the time that they would do normally on electric bikes. So there's lots of changes kind of we're seeing there. And I guess from the technology side, we see ourselves as very much the enabler for driving some of these smart choices that would make within there. But I mean, the benefits that would come off the back of that is pretty significant from an active travel point of view, because not only there's obviously clear health, physical and mental health benefits that are done from just merely exercise, not just cycling, but even walking as well from an active travel perspective. But what we found from some of the studies, and there's an interesting publication from the team at the University of Westminster. There's a professor for transport who's done a research around if we were to make interventions around some of our active travel decisions. What is the implications of that for the economy over the longer term? And they found that £80 million worth of investment into active travel yielded something like £700 million of return over the 20 years projection they have through there. So not only does active travel play an important part for solving quite a few problems in terms of how we get about reducing our usage for environmental purposes, but there's also an economic benefit that encourages people to spend more in certain areas, and more so, and like most people out there that will probably be hearing from us today, cars are expensive to keep them running, the whole use, and having that money then not tied up in a lump of metal gives a lot more freedom for where people want to spend their money. So it's quite an interesting subsection, and active travel, I believe, will solve quite a lot of the problems that we're facing at the minute. And from everything that we see, the components to unlock all of that sits firmly within local government, investment into infrastructure. And as soon as they make that, I think that will be quite a tidal wave of change that we'll see across people's usage. The only thing we can't predict, unfortunately, is the British weather, which limits quite a lot of activity of what we can do. But that's something we can't control, unfortunately.
No, but I mean, adding to that point, I think, and what Tom said earlier, what's really the key foundation for this is having good connectivity. You can't hire the scooter if you've not got connectivity to be able to do the app. They do the car sharing. So having this. What is critical, not only, we've seen it in, some of my early statements about different behaviors of needing good connectivity in the home. It's about good connectivity also elsewhere, so that we've got these, so that people have the ability to be able to use these services, because they're all mobile, they're all require some sort of mobile application or mobile payment generally. And, and thus having that connectivity and that confidence, that connectivity, that I can leave home with just my mobile phone. I'm talking all generations having that confidence to be able to do that, not just the younger generation, but the all generation be able to feel they're confident to do that, and they be able to then use multiple different forms of transport when they're out successfully. I think is an important thing as well.
Well, it's critical, isn't it? If we're being frank about it, because if you can't get a good signal wherever you are, then you can't pay for your scooter, your bike, your bus ticket, your train ticket. How many times on a public rail network have you heard someone go, the app's not working, and therefore face the penalty fare? So, and the government,
it's one of the, one of the key sort of focus of the government is around improving connectivity onto the transport route. So there's lots of activity around, and there's a large trend at the moment about putting mobile connectivity across the main railway lines across the UK. There already is sort of projects on HS1 down sort of from London to Brighton and Brighton to Brighton. So there's a lot of activity, and if you look at sort of the shared rural network, which is a plan around mobile connectivity in the rural area, a lot of those routes they follow the road. Even though some of those areas aren't very populous, they're doing it because they want to provide connectivity on those main trunk areas. But it's still an issue in the urban area, and having, we really need, dense, high performance networks in our urban areas, because we're seeing this increase in demand, when we're out, not just for simple connectivity for apps, or mobile payment.
And I guess Fraser, you've mentioned it. You mentioned those words, the net zero. We're in a post COP26 world now, where the ambitions are apparently, clearer. What opportunities do you see for technology to really support that shift and that change and deliver upon those net zero ambitions? Tom, I'm going to throw it to you first, if that's all right.
Yeah, no, the ambition is huge, and there is an awful lot of complexity, I think, behind the scenes, particularly with an industry such as bus. There's an awful lot of complexity in some of the data formats specified by the operators in order to get these schedules and these timetables and these vehicle locations out into a format that tech providers can consistently use. But there is a capability, I think, within the tech providers to simplify all of that and abstract all of that away. And I think certainly the task of providers like Passenger are to make that customer experience so that it doesn't, all of that information, all that data that's being passed around between the different operating companies and the different modes is all behind the scenes and seamless. So yeah, I think in the next couple of years that's the direction of travel. Some of this stuff will just be so easy to use, I think, in terms of how it's accessed by all different aspects of society.
And I guess similarly, that connectivity piece that you've talked about, Stephen, it feels like connectivity in that digital sense is going to be critical to achieving those net zero ambitions, whether it is working from home or getting your e-bike at the train station.
Yeah, no, absolutely, definitely so. I mean, the sort of internet accounts for about 2 to 3% of the overall sort of CO2 emissions. So it's still large, not doing that, but it's growing because, of course, we've got so much more data that we're storing. Everything is producing data now, so that has to be stored somewhere. That has to be then powered, and our increasing in data, consumption is increasing. So it's only going to increase over time. However but what we can do as an industry around that connectivity is to move to much more, higher performing networks that then, there's a terminology in this sort of the connectivity about this sort of kilowatts per bit. So you want to, improve that. So you can start switch off some of this legacy, move to much more efficient networks. That means you're then putting everything through these more efficient networks. But I think, as you rightly said, it's more about the usage. So simple things like we can reduce the number of of journeys, unnecessary journeys, through simple things like sticking with remote consultations for health visits. If you can take 200 million GP visits, you can take 10% of those off. That's a number of journeys you reduce in there. The fact of the home working, remote education, all these things are going to do around that. But I think there's also an interesting around here is around how we then organize, our smart cities. So some of that will be some regulation in terms of, there are cities now that are saying you can only come into the city if you're collaborating. I think Bristol might be one of those where they're actually stating, you need to collaborate. If you're delivering something, you can come in at certain periods and use the sort of these lanes. But if you've collaborated and shown that you've worked with somebody else, say, right, okay, well, we're going to do deliveries for you in this area as well. So I think that's interesting. But also, it's just about the smart tech, in terms of, how do we, a thing like smart parking. So knowing where pre-booking a spot, so you're not having to drive around looking for in a city centre parking space. You know where it is. You've booked it. Nobody else can book it. And these things are going to aid, benefit in terms of that, reducing our emissions over time.
And I'm going to take it back to another point that you made earlier, Fraser, that got me thinking. You talked about e-bikes and how originally they were marketed at sort of an older generation, trying to encourage them to get back to being fit. And again, you think of certain forms of public transport, there are certain demographics that go on it, whether it's younger and older people, perhaps because they don't have car ownership at the time, as we say now. But how can organizations adapt their messaging so that actually the communication works cross-generational platform? Because I think that's going to be crucial, surely. If we're trying to challenge people to travel less, or do it in a different way, we need to encourage every generation to adopt that shift. How can we start targeting that, and how have you perhaps done that with your e-bikes?
Yeah, so I think e-bikes generally at the start was really pitched at an older audience. I think as we've kind of gone on that journey of understanding the customers that come through and inquire from us, I personally think the actual message doesn't really have much of a generational difference. So, I'll speak to people who, a demographic at Ribble is plus 40 male traditionally. And those guys are just as environmentally conscious as some of the younger audience that we speak to quite regularly. So I don't think the messages have to be tailored very differently. There's certainly a ownership difference that we'll see certainly over time. So more of the younger generation are coming through and they don't really care about ownership. I think that's quite clear from everything we see. Subsidy models to help people get on ownership should help to get some adoption in certain areas. And I think that's going to be one of the key things and messages that we'll see start coming through from government over the next 5 to 10 years as they try to decarbonise pretty much everything. And electric will be the biggest switch, I predict, as part of that. But obviously, generating more electricity has its own challenges on the back end because as much transportation emits as much as some of the electricity at the minute, and that's only going to increase. So the messages that cut through around usage and ownership will be tailored accordingly to the audience. But in terms of the motivation for using, I think that it's going to be pretty similar across the board. The key elements is how do you make it attractive enough for people, and the key elements that will sit around that will be around, is it a frictionless experience to rent a bike, to rent a scooter, to get on a bus, to get on a train? I mean, we spoke about Wi-Fi on trains, and I used to do northwest to London regularly on the old Virgin trains, and the Wi-Fi on there you just wouldn't use it. I actually used the mobile broadband service from a manufacturer because it was just a better experience than it was for a Wi-Fi experience on the train. So those things will naturally levitate towards the experience of that consumer, and I think that's the focus. I think from a lot of the organisations will need to be around is what is that experience for that consumer. And looking at buses, I think is a great example. Buses were like one of the first people to introduce USB charging and Wi-Fi on all buses. There were streets ahead potentially of other public transportation systems, but they needed to make their proposition attractive to get people to use it. And I think that's something we'll see over the next few years, where cars won't be seen as attractive, mainly because we'll be priced out of them through either taxation or cost of fuel. Cost of ownership, as we're seeing through electric cars, is very high, but obviously that will come down in price as scale goes up there. But certainly I think that will help to accelerate some of the discussions for people to make the right choices. But just on my final point on this, I think the key thing to understand in all of these choices that people make is 68% of our journeys in the UK is less than 5 miles. 28% of them is less than a mile. So there's not a lot really we have to change dramatically. We're not talking about miles and miles of infrastructure that needs to happen. There's just needs to be some slight subtle changes around how we plan our streets and what we use them for, and I think we can see some considerable benefits. And certainly my engagement with some of the local government over the past couple of years, the mentality that I think needs to happen is a build it and they will come mentality, whereas at the minute what we're seeing is they want to see a business case and a use case before they start to invest in it. And I think there's going to have to be some real bold bets by some local governments or even central government themselves to really kind of enable this over the long term.
Tom, I'm going to pick up something that Fraser said there, that about the build it and they'll come, and also therefore the structure of how we plan perhaps our cities and our towns. How do you think that buses are a big user of the roads and will remain so, and hopefully will become the bigger user in a sense than private car ownership? How do you see we can better plan our how would you like to see towns and cities better planned to accommodate that public transport model?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't have any qualification in urban design at all, but
that makes you perfectly qualified to answer this question. Then that's fine.
I'm very interested in how we live and how we design our streets. I mean, I mean, certainly during the pandemic, as soon as we went into the first lockdown and the second, we could hear the birds, we could hear the sea, and all those things around us, and there was a noticeable absence of cars on the roads. And would you believe it, the bus networks, pretty much every single one of them around the country was running to schedule. So the removal of that congestion and the reduction of unnecessary journeys, or the replacement of those journeys by simple scooters, bikes, that combination of shift actually has a really positive impact on the bus networks and those core journeys that need to be taken by bus. And you look at the statistics, one in 5 people in the UK have some registered disability, so the bus is a really important route to education, social mobility, and all those the healthcare and all those things. So it's really important that we clear space for the road usage that is really important, and not clog it up. So yeah.
And
Ben, I just want to go back. Sorry, can I just go back to one of your earlier points about the messaging? I think it's also important about sort of the skills. It's not just about messaging. It's about because we're talking about trying to get across all the generations, but it's also about the digital skills. We need to look at the digital skills. If we're starting to put everything in sort of in a mobile application or online, needing some connectivity, you don't just need the connectivity, you need the skills and confidence to use those as well. So I think there needs to be more investment in terms of, we know as a country we lack some of those digital skills, and And I know a lot of organisations are putting money into this to try and build that. But I think also that it's not just the messaging; it's also that the build the skills levels. So you need the messaging, you need the connectivity. So people that get rid of that digital divide. But the digital divide is also in a skills as well. It's not just about not having good connectivity. It's about also being able to use that connectivity.
No, and it's a good point, and particularly when looking at that multi-generational piece. We probably all four of us and plenty of people watching it will take it for granted that we know how to utilize this technology and can use it, and younger generations also. But perhaps some of the older generations might find that a bit more of a challenge.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you, Stephen, actually, building off the bit that Tom said about making sure that the environment is right for the road use. What do you think the environment we need to do with our built environment to make sure that it's right for the digital connectivity as well? Because how many times do you go into a city and find you've got worse signal than you've got perhaps at home in a slightly suburban area?
Yeah, no, definitely so. So I think the there's a number of different points around that. It is quite complex, like all difficult challenges. They're also quite complex around this, but simple things around. Let's start with assets. So we have being able to put a network in, you need to put your equipment onto assets. So there's a lack of information sharing across the asset owners about what's available, where it is. So that's a starting point. Now having that sort of joined up a database where people can go and making it easy and cheap to access to that, and the process of applying for access can be very long-winded to do that. So that's the first starting point. The second point is that they've got a fixation at the moment around sort of two sort of delivery mechanisms for connectivity, which is the mobile operators and the fiber providers. And actually what we need is a sort of more a blended approach, because neither of those is going to deliver everything we need. So we need to bring in and make it the market available for people to be able to put their infrastructure in and build networks. Whether that's a fixed or a network where you've put physical assets in, or what Welink offers, which is a wireless type technology. The market is also about regulation as well. So without being boring and sort of goes with the dull areas, being access to the capacity, the spectrums that are needed to deliver some of these services. So they're some of the sort of key blockers that are today stopping the rollout of this connectivity, because it takes a lot of time. It's very expensive to roll out that infrastructure into it. If you're putting physical infrastructure, and also the regulatory side of it. So I think they're some of the key things around that. That we can sort of remove some of those, and that will allow us to put more of this infrastructure into the cities. And look at having what we really need is in the cities these dense high performance networks where we can just seamlessly roam between there. So also the final point I'd say there is that the last point around the interoperability. So we certain markets have done really well. Look in the US, they've done a list where they allow much more sort of roaming between operators in terms of the infrastructure in place, the sharing of that infrastructure, the sharing of the spectrum that allows you to offer these services, and that being that more open, I think, is going to be help put those networks in place, because that will open up remove some of these technical and commercial blockers.
And then I was thinking back to something again Fraser said earlier on about being able to order a taxi off your phone and track where it is, and we talked about it in deliveries. Do you see that technology coming into the bus network, the rail network a bit more, Tom? Being able to so that when the cars are all back on the road and buses are ultimately therefore delayed because Bob's parked in a bus lane, the customer can track it and go, actually, they are 5 minutes late. Because that to me is always one of those things that drove me up the wall about particularly bus.
I think the adoption of that technology, as I said at the start of the conversation, was slow to be adopted. But I think that is almost ubiquitous now across the bus network in the UK. So that has had a huge impact in people's confidence in that network. So I think anyone that perhaps caught a bus, 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, and did it again now, I think they would see the sort of the rapid adoption and the huge change in how digital, particularly on mobile apps, has made that experience so much better. And I think it's only going to kick on from there. So, being able to track a vehicle, having predictions of when that vehicle is going to be, at your stop, being able to buy a ticket there and then without really having sort of planned what you're actually going to need, whether it's a contactless card or a mobile app payment, that is all very much there. I think what we will see in the next few years is sort of come back to sort of Fraser's point around ownership is more subscription-based travel access. So we start to shift into what is sort of widely accepted in the transport industry as a sort of mobility as a service. It's based on this kind of software as a service subscription model that we all know and love in our kind of online world, our Netflix, our Skies. So taking some of that's really, really mature in the retail space and sort of bringing that sort of into the experience for transit. And I think, that sitting across, whatever the modal mix is in your particular town or your particular geography, and it will be different because scooters don't necessarily work in hilly areas, and buses are perhaps not the ideal fixed route networks, perhaps not the ideal in some incredibly rural areas. So the mix will be different, but the technology will be accessed very much predominantly through mobile and on the web. But the payment side of it, I think, will shift to almost payment plans of a bit like a mobile phone contract, that kind of thing. Now there's an awful lot that needs to happen to enable that, but it does that direction of travel generally feels very natural when you think about the fact that the younger generation coming through, that there are less and less going for driving licenses, less and less people interested, as Fraser rightly said, in actually owning the thing that they are traveling with, whether it be a bike, whether it be a car itself. So.
That's fascinating, and I'm gonna, we're coming sort of towards the end of the session, so I'm going to ask you all to get your crystal balls out because it's a surefire way to get something maybe controversial out there. But and looking at transport of tomorrow, and I'll leave tomorrow up to you to how you decide it. It can't literally be 24 hours time. I'm sorry, it must be a minimum of 5 years away. Where do you see that investment, or where do you see the investment going, perhaps from the central government, but where do you see the experience going and how we actually get about in our towns and our cities? So I'll start with Stephen and work my way back around my screen and hope you're all on my screen in the same order.
Yeah, well, last time, Ben, I think my prediction was that the death of the mobile phone. If you remember right, yes. So I'm not going to predict that, and I didn't as a device. That was what I meant in that sense. But I think that one of the things we haven't talked about is sort of the automated vehicles, and that type of thing. So I think what we'll start to see is lots of different types of transportation put in. We will start to see drone delivery, where we're seeing this, where things are taking off that. So I think what I'm going to prediction is that basically that we move away from, I think that car ownership to where it's a shared model, where it's where we don't actually own it, and actually we're just, going around where we just a car and we book it and we're part of a journey with multiple other people. So that sort of a car being outside our home, be on the street, and we might be able to then use it and book it, but it will be multiple journeys where people are stopping and doing that as part of a sort of joined up, as well as that sort of, where we are getting, deliveries, by different routes in terms of, the drone delivery.
I'm slightly sad. I thought for a minute we were going to go for flying cars, and I was going to get really excited in an iRobot moment.
No, we're not there with technology. It does come back to the network again, because we don't have, because you need this, all the cars being able to communicate to each other. That's how they really ultimately are doing, and then a wider, network, where they connect to. And we're just not at that point. So we'll see it. We'll start to see it on where the motorway, easy, because that's easy to control. But in the sort of more complex urban environment, then no, it's sometime off, I'm afraid, Ben.
Okay, Fraser, to you next.
So I'd say simple for me. I do see a lot more usage in active travel, certainly over the next 3 to 5 years, where they start to become, more realistic options. Part of that is around affordability, and as we've mentioned, the subscription model there for people to use a service, not necessarily own, will drive the adoption quite rapidly. I do think car ownership will decline to the point where we don't even use them at that point. But then what I do see rising is car ownership, like the schemes, the sharing schemes. Stephen mentioned that will become, I think, a bit more prevalent. We are seeing some companies, certainly the rental companies, trying that out, certainly in the more urban areas, and probably having more success than most with it, I'd say, at the moment. But I do see that rapidly jumping ahead. I mean, just to talk of my own personal view, my mum is about to get rid of her car to go down to one of these schemes. So she's already looking at going, I don't use the car often enough, and therefore, for me, it's a viable option. She's of the age where a free bus pass now starts to tick a box. So she's really looking at it not from a way of kind of like environmental choices, but from a financial point of view. And I think a lot of people, as they start to see the usage decline, will start to make some radical choices around what they do and where they go with it. To be a bit more bolder and maybe go with something which is a bit more kind of future looking. The Hyperloop technology, I'm really keen and excited by. So this is where you've got mass transit happening at really rapid speeds within a massive tube, essentially. So Virgin are kind of doing some interesting trials on this technology at the moment. But if you look at how certainly wider and bigger cities, so if you look at London, you look at Los Angeles, where getting from A to B, from east to west is quite difficult and quite time consuming. This sort of technology will start to bring people to be able to cross city quite quickly. And that, I think, will be quite a dramatic way. And of course, autonomous vehicles is an easy one. I mean, we're already seeing that with Tesla in certain accounts. There's still a trust level, I think, there's still a lot of people have around that technology and whether it works or not. But you could certainly see, again, mass transit around town centres. So close to where I live in Manchester, you could see trams being autonomous quite quickly. You could argue buses at some point as well for more of the inner city routes. As cars come out of those sort of suburban areas and replaced by other means, the risk factor of autonomous kind of driving becomes less and less. So therefore, I can see that really moving forward at some pace over the next 5 to 10 years.
Perfect. Just before I come to you, Tom, a very quick one, perhaps, and I think this one might be aimed at you, Stephen, but from Jim, will 5G have a role in connecting the transport network? I sort of think you answered that, but
yeah, absolutely, no, definitely so. It because the a number of reasons. 2 reasons: because it's bandwidth, so we're going to need more and more data because everything's going to be connected and providing data. We need to know, for example, in transport, is a bus going to break down? Is a tram going to break down? We can get that predictive maintenance. So we can take it out of service, fix it before it breaks down in the middle of a road and causing that, or on a track. So we've got that, the data point, the data coming off there, the bandwidth, simple things like being able to put a lot more cameras everywhere. So in the city centre where we've got Trams Manchester, so you can see there's any damage, or any issues going to block things on that, as well as then sort of the latency, which is that sort of the ability to react. So when we come to this automation of stuff, we need to be able to react quickly, and we have very low latency on that 5G network. So as well as on other wireless networks. So so 5G is the multiple different areas. So Welink, we use a band within the 5G, as mobile operators do it. So that when we talk about 5G, we talk about all these different sort of bands. But yeah, it absolutely will play a critical because of it's mainly because of its capacity.
Perfect. I'll take that as a yes. Right, Tom, your future predictions then to bring us home.
We'll certainly see a lot more electric buses, hydrogen-powered buses. So essentially cleaner, quieter, and a lot more modern. And I think that's going to revolutionise the high street, because I think we're going to have that peaceful thing that we got during the lockdown. We're going to have these really slick vehicles that are enjoyable to drive, dropping us off into these kind of cafe outdoor seating arrangements that we've grown to really enjoy. So I think, perhaps not as exciting as Hyperloop, but certainly a sort of a much more modern take on what we have now. In terms of the environment within those vehicles, what they enable in terms of connectivity whilst we're traveling, being able to watch some movies or watch some content, listen to some content while we're moving around, making better use of that time in motion, but also really helping to contribute to that built environment in the sort of the levels of noise that those vehicles aren't creating. I think to build on that, I think we'll see a lot more in the sort of light electric vehicle space as well. I think cargo bikes are turning into small brilliant vehicles to get around our kind of local areas. I mean, we have cars that are designed for motorway crashes running around our kind of localized streets, and 2 tons of metal is not the ideal thing to be sort of riding alongside, as we all know. So I think what we will see is that it is more and more. I'm hearing the term light electric vehicles, because I think that's going to be far more suitable to the environment of local transport.
Perfect. And on that, I'm going to draw it to a close with cleaner buses, a hyperloop, and better connectivity, but no flying cars. So thank you very much to the panel for sharing their insight on this topic. It's certainly one that I think will be interesting to see how urban mobility continues to change as we move forward. Thank you to the session sponsors, Welink Communications and Ribble Cycles. And yes, thank you to you all for watching. But that also brings us to an end of Disruptors Midlands Conference. Thank you to everyone who's joined us over the last however many hours we've had. We've had some fantastic speakers and some wonderful discussions talking about all topics in disruption and the opportunities it presents for the Midlands and the wider UK PLC. I'd like to take a particular moment to thank our headline sponsor, Deloitte, and our other sponsors, Adamson Jones, Curve Block, Freestyle, Innovation Nottinghamshire, Ribble Cycles, Bespoke M&A, and Welink Communications. There will be a full write-up of Disruptors available on the businessdesk.com over the coming days, as well as all the sessions made available to watch in your own time on YouTube if you would like to go back or you were unable to make any of the ones. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you at the next businessdesk.com event. Thank you very much.